God's love has always been there all along. Even for some of us when we didn't want it, or we couldn't find it, or we were blocked by something in the way. But ever since our lives began, God has always been there for us. Today, my sermon is based on Psalms 104. And my sermon title is The Majesty and Providence of God. I break down the word majesty, a dictionary definition. And majesty means greatness, dignity, and excellence. And providence means guardianship and care provided by God. Well, King David was just a man like any other man and became a king. But the Bible says that his heart, he was after God's own heart. And King David knew of his dependence upon God in everything. So I picked, with the Lord's help, I picked Psalm 104. Let's turn in our Bibles to Psalm 104, please. Psalm 104, starting with verse 1. I love the Bible, and I love it when I hear the pages of the Bible being turned, because that's music to my ears and music to God, because there's light coming from the Bible that dispels the darkness. Let's start. Bless the Lord, O my soul. He begins with bless the Lord. O my God, you are very great. You are clothed with honor and majesty. You cover yourself with light as with a garment. You stretch out the heavens like a curtain. In the book of Genesis, chapter 3, verse 7, says that Adam and Eve knew that they were naked. And they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves aprons. They were quite embarrassed. They had lost their pure and holy covering of light. Now, the robe of light that God wears, he also offers to us when he comes with his cloud of angels to take us home. Now, if you want a robe of light here in this planet Earth, you probably have to buy a lot of Christmas lights. It's pretty hard to make a whole robe, but it will never be even the same as what God has for us. So in Genesis 3:21, it says, unto Adam also and to his wife, God made coats of skins and clothed them. He says, the fig leaves got to go, but I'm going to make you skins. This is God's providence that we're talking about here, not just his majesty. We're talking about his providence and love in action when he actually personally made those garments to cover Adam and Eve. Isn't that sweet? He's very personal. Also in these verses we read, it talks about God stretching out the heavens like a curtain. Now, probably many of you have actually witnessed the aurora borealis. Now, we just moved from Yellowknife 3.5 years ago to Creston, and it's there all the time. You can see it all through the winter. In fact, people spend thousands and thousands of dollars to fly from Korea, Japan, China, Indonesia, to go up to Yellowknife. It's a big tourism business, something like $66 million a year. Anyways, they want to see the aurora borealis. But we're talking about God and stretching the heavens out like a curtain. Now, our finite minds, we can't see far. You look at night, you can see the stars. But if one day, when Jesus comes to take us home, and we can actually observe the whole universe, possibly, it may look like the universe is like curtains. We don't know. But it talks like that, stretches out the heavens like a curtain. It may be like the aurora borealis. There's so many things we don't know, and so excited to be able to learn and see. Verse 3 and 4 of Psalm 104. Who lays the beams of his chambers in the waters, who makes the clouds his chariot, who walks upon the wings of the wind. Now, who normally would write that? A lot of poetry in the world, it's it's good, but here this is something that you don't normally see in poetry. This is truth. And who makes his angels spirits. He has different chambers of snow, of hail. He has lightning preserved, thunder, and I couldn't even imagine how big the quantities are of them, but they're always there. He always had them stored ready. But he makes his angels spirits, his ministers a flaming fire. You know that when we pray, we're told by my favorite author, in Spirit of Prophecy, that when we pray, the angels bring our prayers like lightning to God. That's how important we are. And that's how much God loves us, to be able to hear our prayers like lightning, so quick. In Psalms 34:7, you could turn out with that with me. Psalms 34, verse 7. The angels of the Lord encamps around them that fear him, and he delivers them. The angel of the Lord camps around them that fear him and deliver him. Does that just mean to those that are doing right, they're righteous, their lives are perfect? Or does it also to those that are not doing so well? Many years ago, I lived in the streets of Vancouver, Maine and Hastings. They used to call it Pain and Wastings. And I was with a group, a gang, and I insulted the gang leader's wife. And it was bad. Some of the guys left the room, went down the hall, and I could hear the snap, snap of the guns. And I had really seriously done something wrong. And what they do is they just hold you down with a pillow and pop you. You're over. I knew I'd said something wrong. I knew my fate. And I just said to the guys around, I got to use the washroom, which was down the hall this way, and the other guys are this way. He says, well, what about your beer? He says, I'm coming back for my beer. This is when I was in the world. I walked down the hall, and as soon as I got to the stairway, we were 3 flights up, and I ran down the stairway, ran out the front of the building, ran around the building, crossed the street, into this great big parking lot that was empty, except for a Volvo station wagon in a corner. And the guys were on the roof, the guys were down below, they were after me. They couldn't find me. But I'm behind this little Volvo. I had boogied as fast as I could and got behind that Volvo. And I said, Lord, forgive me again. Help me, Lord, because I know that I'm finished here. And I says, I want out of here. I want to change my life. And this was the beginning when I had enough. And this lady came up the alleyway. I mean, there's rats, there's garbage that stinks in the alleyways of Vancouver. This lady in a white dress, about mid-30s, with beautiful brunette hair, came around in a white dress, a long white dress, came up to me right beside the Volvo, and she says, can I help you, sir? I says, can you get the police? And she says, okay. She left. And sure enough, the police came, and they took me away in the car. I said, take me to the SkyTrain. I want to get out of here. I want to go to Abbotsford where I'm safe. And that's where I started getting help. But I saw, I believe, my guardian angel that day. And I testify that today. Like, who would be in the middle of a God-forsaken place, dressed beautifully in a white dress, walking around the streets of Vancouver, and, where there's 10,000 addicts and alcoholics. Verse 5, Psalm 104, verse 5. Who laid the foundations of the earth, that it should not be removed forever. In the Creston Church, one time I went searching out of the town to find a bedrock. And I found this great big rock, and I got a cart, and I could barely lift that thing, put it on the cart, and I brought it to church. Put it up front. I said, can anybody lift this? And I says, this is only a little, almost like a speck, compared to how great the earth is, the bedrock of the earth. So how great is God? Well, we're reading about him right now in Psalm 104. He is majestic. He is mighty in creation. He keeps all the stars in order, the planets in order. A lot of times we underestimate him, but we're going to also learn not of his majesty, but of his providence, of his great love and care for us. Verse 6, you cover the earth with deep as with a garment. The waters stood above the mountains. At your rebuke they fled. At the voice of the thunder they hasted away. In Genesis chapter 1, verses 6 to 8, it reads, and God said that there would be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let them divide the waters from the waters. That's a strange statement. How are you dividing the waters from the waters? And God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. Very interesting. And it was so. So, scientists, archaeologists, biblical scholars believe what is being talked about in here is that before the flood, there was a canopy of water that was above the earth. And what it did, it held twice the oxygen content and twice the atmospheric pressure, which was so healthy, and it also it stopped the UV rays. Now, a scientist in Japan built a biosphere, doubled the oxygen content, doubled the atmospheric pressure, and he had a tomato plant in this perfect environment, which we believe was where Adam and Eve were living. And he had a tomato plant that was 3 years old and had over 5,000 tomatoes. Also, they used biospheres for athletes and different other things to help healing quicker. So at one time, we had a biosphere. And then when the flood came, it says the waters fell on the earth, and they came up from the deep, from underneath the deep. And that's where we had so much water today. We'll continue on to verse 16. I'm actually going to read from 9 to 16. Thou hast set a bound of the water that they may not pass over, that they not turn again to cover the earth. So we're not going to have another flood. He sends the springs into the valleys which run among the hills. So he's taking care of the earth to water it. They give drink to every beast of the field. You know, the beasts are all taken care of. God's thinking about the beasts. And the wild asses quench their thirst. By them shall the fowls of heaven have their habitation, which sing among the branches. He waters the hills from his chambers. The earth is satisfied with the fruit of his works. He causes the grass to grow for the cattle and herb for the service of man. Isn't this providence? Isn't this wonderful how he is taking care of us in every respect? Now, what if he didn't? Well, the earth would just be a dry, dark, brown piece of land, and we'd all die. And wine that makes glad the heart of man, and I believe it's grape juice or something, probably healthy. And oil to make his face to shine. Olive oil is good for you, and all the different other type of oils, vitamin E oil, and bread which strengthens man's heart. And I have a little story for you after about bread. It's very interesting. The trees of the Lord are full of sap, the cedars of Lebanon which he hath planted. Well, we're talking about sap here. Well, who likes maple syrup? How sweet is the sap and how sweet is God? When I think of maple syrup, I love maple syrup. I go to Walmart because it's a lot cheaper. And Crest and everything's expensive. But cedar trees were also used for Solomon's temple. Cedar trees were also used by the Phoenicians to build ships. Isn't God providing for us the providence of God? And also, there's this one species of cedar, which is the white cedar, which is in Latin translated a tree of life. It has medicinal properties in the sap, the bark, and the twig. Providence again? Yes, 100%. So, we're going to go to verse. Go here first. Okay, we could turn the HDMI on. Well, we'll read it first. I don't see Josh at the moment. We'll read verse 17 and 18. Are we good? Okay, good. Where the birds make their nests, as for the stork, the fir trees are her house. Some birds are on the ground. The ostrich just leaves her eggs after she lays them. Doesn't care. The high hills are a refuge for the wild goats. Well, let's go look at God's providence for the goats. Isn't that something? Can we actually climb like they do? Isn't God wonderful? He makes the goats and gives them the ability to do that. And this is a really good one, this one here. Now, how do they stay up on that? Isn't that amazing? And God created these goats and created the ability and created the bedrock that they're attached to. God's providence is amazing, isn't it? So we carry on. It says, the high hills are for the refuge for the wild goats, and the rocks for the conies. Can anybody tell me what a coney is? A rock badger, okay. Kind of, yeah. Dictionary says rabbit, but they are actually called a hyrax. And I'm going to show you what they're about. Now, probably nobody knows too much about the hyrax, but I'm going to share with you, just as a lesson in the province of God. So the coney actually is a hyrax. There you can see, he's a cute little guy. He's about 9 pounds and 12 inches long. Predominantly in Europe, but you can find him in other countries. There you can see how they live. They live amongst the rocks. Cute little guys. And then I'm going to show you their families. So this is a colony of hyrax, and this is how they live. And I'm going to share with you a little bit. It's always nice to learn about something that we haven't studied before. The conies, or the hyrax, are but a feeble folk, yet they make their houses in the rocks. From Proverbs 30:26. They also talks in Psalms. They have small ears and thick bodies. As large as I can get. Thick bodies. Grown-up hyraxes weigh about 9 pounds and about 12 inches long, so they're a little smaller than a groundhog. Unlike these animals, hyraxes don't dig deep burrows. The places they choose for homes already have piles of rocks and crevices to live in. They keep their homes tidy by deciding on one spot to use as a bathroom, so the rest of the area stays clean. They seem to let each other know how they're feeling and keep in touch with neighboring groups with all kinds of whistles, twitters, shrieks, and growls. To stay near the protection of their dens, hyraxes only venture about 150 feet from their homes to look for food. That's as far as they ever go, 150 feet average. They're vegetarians, eating whatever kinds of plants they can find, especially grass and leaves, and that's where they get their moisture, their water from the plants. Baby hyraxes are born with their eyes open and lots of fur to protect them. They start running around at just an hour old and try out the veggies within a day or two. Hyraxes are a lazy bunch. They spend about 95% of the time just lying around. During the day, they spend most of the time basking in the sun. Well, the fossil record shows that before the flood, there were a lot more varieties of hyraxes. It shows that they lived in more places And some of them were actually really big, about the size of a small horse. Wow, that's a big furry creature, isn't it? But so we're learning a little bit more about God, about His creation, His majesty, and His providence, just in a simple, species that we have here, and how many more species are there that we could study and just be, amazed at. Let's go to verse 19 to 22. Learn more about our Father in heaven. He appointed the moon for seasons. The sun knows his going down. You make darkness as it is night, wherein all the beasts of the forest do creep forth. The young lions roar after their prey and seek their meat from God. The sun arises and they gather themselves together and lay them down in the dens. Everything's taken care of. So we're going to go on to verse 24 here. Man goes forth out unto his work, and to his labor unto the evening. Is that pretty common? Well, unless you work in a hospital, you might work the night shift or somewhere. O Lord, how manifold are your works, how amazing are your works. In wisdom you have made them all. The earth is full of your riches. So this great and wide sea, wherein all things creeping innumerable, both small and great beasts, there goes the ships. We're going to continue on all the way up to 28. There goes the ships. There is that Leviathan which thou hast made to play therein. I'm not sure what a Leviathan is, but I think it's quite an amazing creature, and I don't know if they exist anymore either. But the way it's described, especially in the book of Job, a Leviathan is an amazing creature. These wait all upon you, that thou may give them their meat in due season, that thou givest them their gather, thou openest thy hand, they are filled with good. So I'm going to go to another place here. So, do you know Murray McGill? He preached here. Well, him and I got together, and he's a commercial fisherman for many years. But there's not much to do if you don't have a boat around this area. So I said to him, well, let's go find a boat. And he says, okay. So I looked online for quite some time, and all of a sudden I couldn't find anything. Everything was either, in bad shape or needed to be rebuilt. But this one boat showed up, and it's like, that's the boat. I thought, that's the boat. Okay. I went to him, it was $1,900. I said, your engine's seized. That's the heart of the boat. Comes with a trailer, he says, and he had a little Kubota tractor, a brand new one. But he wanted to put inside a storage shed, and he wanted the boat out of there. So he wanted to get rid of the boat. So I says, it's not worth much to me. He says, well, what would you offer? And he says, well, it's bad shape. $300. Sure, I'll take it. So we got this $300 boat. I went on Google, and I never did any repairs to a boat again, but God helped me to rebuild this boat. So we wanted to go see sea creatures near Port Hardy, near Vancouver Island. And so Murray and me and my wife and a few others, we took off, pulled the boat there, put it in the water, and we prayed. He says, Lord, help us to see some sea creatures, to see of your amazing creativity. And you know what? He brought us so many. But here's 4 short videos of what we did experience. These are orcas, and they went right underneath our boat. Orca whales. These are sea lions right beside our boat. These are all living in the natural, and we just putted up to them, shut off the motor, and amazing creatures. I'll play that one once more again. But they seem happy. They seem like they're flipping around in the water, and then you can see some in the distance that are on the rocks, just hanging around. So these we saw, and then this one. So this was really amazing. We saw many, many of these, but this is a whale. He is 90 feet long. So if you go from this wall past the church and beyond 90 feet, that's how big they are. They're amazingly huge. And God takes care of them and feeds them. 90 feet long. Dolphins. You can't really see too much, but they're jumping. You can see they're jumping all around our boat, and they like to go in the front of the boat, and there's two of them jumping in front of the boat. I didn't catch, but they were splashing our windshield. We couldn't see. But amazing. So our prayer was answered, amongst other things that we saw there. It was just jaw-dropping amazing. And that's it for this. We can go back to what we were talking about before. Yeah, we can get rid of that one here. In Psalms 104:23, it says, "Man goes forth his work and his labor unto the evening." Everything's planned for us. And I'm going to read the rest. Coming from number 29. "You hide your face, they are troubled. You take away their breath, they die and return to the dust. Thou sendest forth thy spirit, they are created, and thou renewest the face of the earth." You know, one thing I can actually say is that when I go hiking, or when I go walking around in the, outdoors, I never run into a lot of dead carcasses. God always takes care of them too. You don't see, how many die? Well, how many people die? It's just so many things that we don't even realize are happening all the time. And then he creates a brand new little baby. It's just all the time. Always God is doing something. You renew the face of the earth. You bring forth another generation, whether it be man or the cow or the fox, or he's always bringing a new generation. "The glory of the Lord shall endure forever." I love that. "The Lord shall rejoice in his works. He looks on the earth and it trembles. He touches the hills and they smoke. I will sing unto the Lord as long as I live." This is David, King David, telling us this. And I want to do the same thing. "I will sing praise to my God while I have my being." And one thing I want to do is I want to walk with God like Enoch. And you know what? God says, yes, you can. For every human being, it's available that you can walk with God. It says, "Lord, I want to walk with you. I want to be with you throughout the day, wherever I am, whatever I'm doing." And it's so easy to forget him because we get so busy, or we have things happening, or we got family, friends, or church. Sometimes we don't remember him. But let's try to remember him, because he wants to walk with us. "My meditation of him shall be sweet." Verse 34. "I will be glad in the Lord. Let the sinners be consumed out of the earth, and let the wicked be no more. Bless thou the Lord, O my soul, praise ye the Lord." Now I find something very interesting about this Psalm 104, because here we have 34 verses that tell us of the majesty and the providence of God. And we only have one verse, and only half of it says, "Let the sinners be consumed out of the earth, and let the wicked be more." It's only half a verse, and the rest of it is, "Bless thou the Lord, O my soul, praise ye the Lord." I said, "Well, Lord, how come we only have a half a verse about the wicked?" And it's like, the understanding that I got is that, so here is the beginning of eternity, and there's eternity going on, and in the middle of it is this little glitch of the wicked, the little glitch of sin. And after that, for eternity, it'll never be again. And I looked at this, I said, the reason that verse is so little, and there's not much to talk about it, because it's not going to be around for very long. And it's going to be a glitch, and then eternity will go on forever and ever. So, you see the mercy of God in here. He's talking about how much he loves us, how much he creates everything. And it's a little bit up here just says, the wicked are going to be no more. And it's sad, because God will remember everybody he's ever created forever. But they are not safe to save. I'm going to go to one of my favorite books called Patriarchs and Prophets. By the word of the Lord were the heavens made, and all the host of them that breathe through his mouth. For he made, and all the host of them by the breath of his mouth. For he spoke, and it was. He commanded, and it stood fast. He laid the foundations of the earth, that it should not be removed forever. Remember the bedrock I told you about? The whole earth is made of that massively strong bedrock. And it's like, he's the rock of our salvation. We can trust in him. As the earth came forth from the hand of its maker, it was exceedingly beautiful. Its surface was diversified with mountains, hills, and plains, interspersed with noble rivers, lovely lakes, but the hills and the mountains were not abrupt and rugged like we see today. They were and not abounding in terrific steeps and frightful chasms as they do now. The sharp, ragged edges of Earth's rocky framework were buried beneath the fruitful soil. It wasn't even here. We're told that the land was hilly and symmetrical. There were no loathsome swamps or barren deserts in the beginning. Graceful shrubs and delicate flowers greeted the eye everywhere you looked. The heights were crowned with trees more majestic than any that now exist. The air, untainted by foul miasma, was clear and healthful. The entire landscape outvied the beauty of decorated grounds of the most proudest palace. The angelic host viewed the scene with delight and rejoiced at the wonderful works of God, and that's prepared for us one day. After the earth, with its teeming animal and vegetable life, had been called into existence, which we learned from here, Psalm 104, the crowning work of God, and the one for whom the beautiful earth had been fitted up for, was brought upon the stage of action. He who set the starry worlds on high and tinted with delicate skill the flowers of the field, he who filled the earth and heavens with the wonders of his power. When he came to crown his glorious work, to place one in the midst to stand as ruler of the fair earth, did not fail to create a being worthy of the hand that gave him life. Talking about you and me. We talk about everything in Psalms, about his creative power, but the greatest creation that he ever did and that he loves is us. And he wants to be with us forever. Wonderful, amazing God. Worthy of all praise and glory. I'd like to tell you a story about a man who came to Yellowknife, and he was doing revivals. He had been all around the world, and the Lord was leading him. He had been to Saudi Arabia, to one of the richest of the Saudi Arabia, I can't remember what the name of them, the Saudi Arabian, there's a word, but he was one of the richest oil guys up in Saudi Arabia. He was invited over to talk to him about Jesus, and he was very, very influenced by him. But his name was Pastor Don and April, and they had traveled around the world. Well, they came up to Yellowknife, and they did a revival for a week, and everybody came from the church. Remember that? And he was telling us how God works in his life. Well, he says, we had a house in California. All our kids were on their own now, and the Lord said, you're going to sell your house. Just by a still small voice, he knew they were going to sell their house because they were going to work in Canada at the CUC, which is now Burman University. And when they sold the house, he says, my wife and I knew that the Lord wanted us to give all the money away. So they gave it to all kinds of ministries, respectable ministries. It is Written, Amazing Facts, 3ABN, some of the missions in different countries. They gave all the money away they got for the house. And then they're going to go from there all the way up from California to Lacombe, Alberta, for a job that they think they might have. They weren't guaranteed it, but they knew that the Lord was leading them. So they had some change still, and they still had a full tank of gas with their RV, and They had a little extra money stuck away somewhere that wasn't the house money, about $100. So they drove all the way up to the Wyoming. Is Wyoming right on the Canadian border? What's beside Idaho? Montana. They drove up to one of the small little border crossings. And they drove up, and the border guard said, well, what can I do for you guys today? He says, well, we're crossing into Canada. He says, okay. What's your reason? He says, well, I might have a job at CUC in Lacombe. Might have a job? He says, yes. Well, how much money do you have on you since you're coming into Canada? He says, well, I got $100. He says, you're coming into Canada, and you're going to go and live in Canada. You don't even know where you live. You got a place to live? He says, no, not yet. But I know that God's going to take care of us. God? He says, yeah, the Lord's told us to come this far and come to this border, and we're supposed to go to Canada. He says, really? God directed you to come here to this spot with $100, no place to live, and possibly a job? He says, yeah. You know, the man used to be a Christian, the border guard. And he said, you know what? I believe you. And tears start coming down. He says, I was a Christian. And you've pretty well influenced me that I need to go back and ask God to help me and go back to church. You can go through. So they went across there. And he did get the job. And they did get a place. And then he's still traveling now. He did his work for a while there. And what a faithful man. So we're talking about God, who's majestic, but yet he is so close to us in relationship. He loves us so much. He went to the cross. You know, I had a gentleman come to my house the other day, and Jerry has all kinds of properties, and he's buying and selling in Alberta. He was coming to visit a friend in Creston and popped over my place with his friend, my friend. And Jerry says, you haven't made your decision yet. He says, yeah, I know, but I'm working on it. I said, well, you've been working on it for a long time. When? He says, God is waiting for you. He's calling you. He says, yeah, I know. I says, well, let me just give you something to think about. He says, okay. So I went to a drawer, and I got these great big spikes, 2 of them. And I got a big sledgehammer. And I says, you know that Jesus paid the price for you on the cross? He says, yeah. He says, well, how would you like to just lay down on, the floor here, and I'd like to drive these spikes through your feet? And he said, no. He says, I can't even imagine what that would feel like. I says, well, that's what Jesus did for you. And he did it through his hands too. And he says, wow, I never thought about that. Yeah, he went to the cross for you and me. And he wants you to be with him forever. And that's as far as I could go, because the rest is up at his decision, right? So this was something that the Lord put upon my heart. I was going to bring those spikes today and a hammer, but I think you got the idea. It's pretty serious. I don't know how long you guys go for your sermon here, but in Creston, they usually give you 20 minutes, maybe 25, but I always go over. But if you go to the Philippines, they go till 7 at night. But I'm probably not going to do that today. Let me tell you a story, wonderful story, true story. In the year 1900 in Russia, there's an area called Moldova, one of the poorest areas of Russia. This husband and wife had 2 jobs, and no matter how much they managed money, it was hard to get ahead financially. Sometimes even food was hard to get, such as bread, apples, and salt. Beans, cabbage, and onions were fairly plenteous there. Communist Russia had a slogan that said, a job for everyone and everyone for a job. And whatever they told you what to do, that's what you did. Unless you had money and influence, it was different. In this area, Sergei and his wife, Lena Petrovich, worked in Moldova to establish churches and spread the message of the love of Jesus. Now, they both have regular jobs, but they couldn't get ahead. The Russian government taught that there was no God. Government officials said nice things about Seventh-day Adventists in public, and when they visited as guests in our churches, which are there quite a bit often, which was the KGB, which was the secret police, visiting our churches in Russia. They always talked about how much they wanted to cooperate with church leaders, but behind the scenes, the KGB secret police were found that they were forever planning a strategy that would undermine the effectiveness of the Seventh-day Adventist Church and the Three Angels message. The Seventh-day Adventists were always known for how they had natural remedies and treatments that seemed to work like magic throughout the community. And the evidence that they were a quiet people, they didn't interfere with politics or local governments, but instead they themselves were helping others and spreading the message of hope. They were forbidden to hold public meetings for evangelistic purposes, so they could have a church like this, but the KGB were in the church when they're having their service, and they weren't allowed to make decisions, and they weren't allowed to push the gospel. So what happened? They created night meetings. Night meetings were the only time when they had freedom to discuss church, the Bible, deciding on member positions, and voting for a new president. These evening meetings were illegal, and you could be arrested, put in jail, tortured, or even put to death for doing that. One evening, there was a meeting planned to decide on who was going to be the next president of the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Moldova area. Carefully, Pastor Sergei walked many blocks looking for signs of the KGB, the secret police, and finally resolved that they weren't around and attended the meeting, and there was about 8 members, and they voted in a new president. Afterwards, he went home to Lena, his wife, and went to bed. Shortly after was a loud banging on their door, and the KGB police told Sergei, "We have come to take you to headquarters. Let's go." Sergei says, "Well, why? What I've done? What am I charged with?" "We don't need to charge you with anything. We just only have to have suspicion." The KGB police yelled and threatened and beat Sergei with a rubber hose. But he said in his testimony, he says, "They beat me with a rubber hose, and I could feel the welts, but I didn't feel any pain." You see how God works? God takes away the pain. Then he wouldn't talk. We want to know who your people are and where they are. We want to know where all your churches is. Now, there was 24 churches in that area of Moldova. He says, "I can't tell you. They're like my family. I will not give them up to you." So they said, "All right, fine. We're going to take you to the Brasini maximum prison, and we'll see if you'll talk there, because they make people talk there." So he got on a bus with another one, and then they had to go with a couple of soldiers on a train. Well, people were wondering, because he's in cuffs, so is the other guy, and they're wondering what did he do? And when the soldiers went off the car to another car to have a cigarette, they asked him, "Why are you in chains? He looked like a pretty nice guy." He says, "Well, I'm a preacher for the Lord, and that I've been preaching the gospel for the salvation of souls." He says, "Everybody needs to hear this." And they all listened. And then one man especially listened. He had all kinds of questions. And he says, "I need to give my heart to Jesus." In that whole car, everybody was eyeball on that pastor preaching. And when the soldiers came back and they knew what he was doing, they put him on the baggage car. It was cold and nowhere to sit. And that's where the rest of the trip went. But he says, "I know that the Lord brought me on this trip for a reason." So the Brasini, the warden, was a mean man. Oh, he was a hardened man. And when he had to go before the warden, his eyes were like cold steel on him. He says, "What do you think you're doing? You can't do that. Nobody does that in our country. There is no God." And he says, "Are you have anything to say for you? Do you want to give up your ideas, your beliefs?" He says, "No, I will never give up my trust and my faith in God." He says, "What about the people that you were associating with in the churches?" "I can't give up names." And so they yelled at him, and they tried to force him in different ways to speak, and he wouldn't. So finally, the warden says, "I'll make you speak. I will starve you. I'm going to put you in solitary confinement, and that's where you'll be for a long period of time, with no food, only water." So Sergei only had a thin shirt and a light jacket, plus they gave him a little thin blanket with holes in it, And there was a bed with a thin mattress, and they put him in this solitary confinement room. There was a window quite high up that he couldn't reach, but you could see light through it in bars. And there was a little opening here that the guards could look in to see how you're doing. So he was in a very cold situation. Winter was coming soon. And he was so cold he couldn't sleep. And he says, Lord, I need to sleep. I'm so tired and I'm so hungry. I don't have any food in my stomach. And he said that, I suffered most of the first night. And he says, but in the morning, I was so hungry. He says, I couldn't keep warm. He heard some scratching on this little window up top. And he wondered what that was. And he went up to look, and there was a slice of black Russian bread, rye bread. And he thought, how did that get there? But he saw a black shadow, and it was gone. And he looked, he put the bed, actually lifted the bed up, and he climbed on top of the bed, and he could barely with his tiptoes see out the window, and there was a tree right in front of his window, and then there was the big yard for all the prisoners to play, to have recreation. So he took the piece of bread, he was going to eat it, he thought, well, how am I going to witness to the Lord if I eat this bread right now? He says, I need to show the warden that there is a God, and he does love me and take care of me. He says, but what am I going to do, because there's rats around here? He says, well, I'm going to pray, Lord, please protect this bread. And he put it underneath his mattress. And when he went to bed that night, all of a sudden he felt this warmth that he never felt when he first came in. And he says, I was so tired. I hadn't slept now for 2 days. And all of a sudden this warmth came over my body. And that I laid down and I was warm all night and I slept all night. He says, I couldn't believe it because here I should never have been warm. God took care of him. In the morning, he heard the scratching again. Reached up, another slice of black Russian rye bread. He says, well, I have 2. I can eat 1 and still have 1 for evidence. But wouldn't it be better if I had 2? But he says, I'm so hungry though. Oh, but I want to honor God and prove that there is a God. So Lord, help me, because I'm so hungry. So he says, I'm going to keep these 2 slices, because it's better to have 2 than one to prove that there is a true God that takes care of his people. That evening, another scratching. Go up there, a 3rd slice of black Russian bread. And he could see the black form of something disappear. And he put his bed up, he couldn't see anybody, didn't see anything. This went on for 5 days. And he had 6 slices of bread now tucked underneath this mattress. And he said, I want to honor you, Lord. I don't want to even eat one of these, because each one of these, in the amount that I have, most definitely proves that you exist and that you take care of me. Well, about the 5th day come, and the warden, thinking that he's going to finally give up his foolish ideas, came and went to the window and says, how are you doing, Sergey? What's going on? Are you hungry yet? He says, no, not hungry at all. He says, what do you mean? He says, well, God is always taking care of my needs. And no, I haven't really been hungry, but he's been supplying me with lots of bread. He says, bread? What do you mean bread? He says, this is maximum security prison. Has someone been bringing you bread? Have the guards been bringing you bread? Tell me now. And he says, no, God has been supplying my bread, my needs. I've been getting bread every day, morning and night. And here it is. So he held it up. Well, the warden didn't know what to think. He was surprised. He opened the big door. He says, how can this be? How can this be that you have bread here? Who told you that, or who brought you this bread? I will have him whipped. I will have him removed from the prison. Which guard did it? He says, no guard. But my God supplied my needs. And he's just looking. He says, there has to be somebody. And then all of a sudden, there was some scratching at that little window. And they looked up there, and there was a black cat that brought up another slice of bread. And the warden looked, and he said, that's my daughter's cat. And that's my wife's bread she just made. She makes only that type of bread. And he says, I believe there is a God. If this has happened before me, and he gave his heart to the Lord. True story. So my sermon today is about the majesty of God, the providence of God, about how much he loves us so much that he went to the cross to die for us, to suffer those spikes, pounded in with a sledgehammer on that wood that he had laid himself on. And he willingly laid down, like we've read about Isaac, Abraham and Isaac laid down his life. I just want to say that God loves you so much, and that he wants to spend eternity with you. He wants to walk with you.
Are you looking for answers in these unprecedented times? Are you wondering what the future holds? Maybe you need a church family to be a part of, or prayer for something going on in your own personal life. Join us every Saturday at 10 a.m. as we search the scriptures to understand what God has in store for our lives now and in the future. If you are unable to make it in person, watch us live on YouTube, Facebook, or Rumble. God bless as we await the soon coming of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ.